ultimately there's somebody in the company or some team in the company that has to look at the device as it's being designed and start developing the IFU for the cleaning, disinfection, sterilization of that device.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Hey there, clean freaks. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, season 24, episode 8. This is the finale episode of season 24, and we're talking to Ralph Basile, the corporate standards executive at Healthmark Industries Company, Inc., a Getinge Company. And I can't think of a better way to wrap up an entire season talking about documentation than the one document that maybe gives us the most anxiety and stress. This is the IFU. This is the one that can make us or break us, that can make the instrument or break the instrument, quite literally and metaphorically. So hang with us. It's going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk the technical side. We're going to talk from the manufacturer's perspective. We're going to talk from the user's perspective. There is going to be value no matter what role you play in the industry, no matter what your job title is. Stay tuned. In just a couple of moments, we'll be right back with Ralph Basile.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, so we're here in studio today with Mr. Ralph Basile, the corporate standard executive at Healthmark Industries Company, Inc., a Getinge Company. Ralph, you've been on the show before, but it's been a while since we had you.
I think it was season 1, if I remember right. I was sitting in the lobby of a hospital.
I do remember that. Yeah. That's right. Well, you know, I've told this story a couple times through the life of the podcast, but early on, you know, we were looking for corporate support. I think it was season 2 to keep going, you know, keep the mission going, keep the conversation going. And I remember your Healthmark team was one of the ones that reached out and said, hey guys, we're willing to help you get this off the ground. And that was so pivotal, like just confidence, right? To say, hey, someone else believes in this project. We're on the right stream of things. And so I wanted to tell you again, you know, that meant the world to us. And it's been an honor to continue to do this show, you know, through the years, but also to get you back on the show now here in season 24. Yeah. We're still going strong.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and I mean, you guys are to be congratulated. We could tell very early on a tremendous passion for what you all do, the team that you've put together, and as you've developed the product and products, you know, you've done a fantastic job. And I mean, people. You know, the Beyond Clean name is well known, and it's well known globally. I want you to know that. You know, I'm involved in some international standards activities and groups, and Beyond Clean has a significant footprint. So, I mean, really, congratulations to you and your colleagues, and for Healthmark, it's great to be associated with Beyond Clean. So,
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. And as I say all the time, we're still just getting started. You know, it seems like all the way season 24, you would think that we've got it all figured out. We've talked about everything we want to talk about, done everything we want to do, but that's not quite the case.
No. There's always opportunities for
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Which is why, you know, IFU, this topic is a perennial topic. I mean, I can't think of anything else in the industry that is talked about, complained about, written about, educated about as often as IFUs. And yet here we are doing a show on IFUs again. But as I mentioned to you before we started recording, this show, this entire season, I guess, has been all about documentation and themes of documentation within sterile processing. And we could not do an episode on documents without talking about IFUs. I know you and your team have actually been a part of an IFU project here recently. I guess maybe let's start there. What is this IFU can that we've seen buzzing around for the last couple of years?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. So, it's a few of us got together, as I mentioned earlier, back when it was called ISHM, but HSPA during a meeting, and we had some communications beforehand. And we know, as participants in the industry, that there's a lot that can be improved when it comes to IFUs, as far as validating them, and then also writing them, publishing them, and making it possible. And it's a struggle. I mean, with so many devices, right? I mean, it's very difficult for a sterile processing department, any department that's responsible for reprocessing a device, to implement all the different IFUs that they're in place. So IFU Can is really an advocacy group, and when we live on LinkedIn. We publish articles, we do interviews, but what we're advocating for is that the IFUs be validated, preferably by an independent testing lab, and that they be steps that actually can be implemented at a healthcare facility. And that second part is the tougher of the two, but that's what we do. And so, we have a LinkedIn page where we, like I said, that's our primary form of communication, and we're nothing on the order of Beyond Clean, but, I think we're up close to about 300 participants, and a lot of them are still processing folks, professionals, but also from industry as well. So.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a large following, obviously, on LinkedIn. So hopefully we'll have some folks hear this episode and say, let me go check out this IFU conversation.
Sounds good.
So the who behind IFUs is one of those questions, I think, that could be some misconceptions out there in the space. But then also we might have some new technicians tuning in saying, hey, what are these things that are treated as if they fell down from heaven and landed in our lap, without error, perfect. We got to follow the IFU. They know that at least. But who's writing these things? How do these documents come to life?
Well, it's funny you asked that. Actually, just 2 weeks ago at the AMI Nexus conference, which is kind of a rebranding of what used to be known as the International Standards Conference and broadening the scope. But I happened to be part of a panel discussion with somebody from Intuitive, and then we had somebody from FDA that's a reviewer over a department that reviews submissions, which includes your labeling, which is the IFU, and somebody you would know well, Damian Berg was also on our panel, and we topic was writing practical IFUs. And so it was a really interesting discussion. And all of us that were on that panel have been actively involved in AMI and ISO and ASTM, et cetera, activities, HSPA, et cetera, to try to improve what happens. But usually there's somebody, I can talk about certainly Healthmark. Let's say we have a brand new product that's in development. And one of the things during that development process is the IFU. And if I can go all the way back, it starts out with the device gets designed. And one of the things we're advocating for, both within IFU Can and then also in standards activities, is that devices be designed for cleanability. Sterilization is pretty robust, right? And there's exceptions, but it's really being able to clean complex devices that's such a big challenge. So,
what a novel idea, right?
Yeah.
To actually design the device to be clean.
Yes, exactly. And, I certainly understand where the designers, the engineers are focused on what the device is going to be used for from the standpoint of being used on a patient, right? And being used by a surgeon or some other, endoscopist or whatever. And they're totally focused on that. And that makes a lot of sense, right? These devices are designed to save lives or deal with illnesses, et cetera. But not on their radar in many cases is, okay, now this thing's got to get clean. And then it's got to be disinfected. And then depending what it is, it's going to have to be sterilized or high level disinfected or whatever. Well, a lot of times that doesn't enter into the process till it's almost too late from the standpoint of designing a device. But you are seeing more and more companies, I will say, put more and more emphasis on that and looking at the cleanability of the device early on. And there are, I mean, the FDA, their guidance document, which originally was the version that we work from now, was published in 2015. They updated it in 2017 with an annex that called out certain device types that they are particularly interested in cleaning instructions. And not that any device they care about, but they called out ones that are more complex, that they're really going to even require more testing, paying more attention. So there's an ASTM document that actually was written by FDA folks, but that talks about devices from a cleanability standpoint. There's a new ISO work item, which is working to categorize or classify devices from kind of risk complexity standpoint that will help in the validation process. You know, if you have like matted surfaces or, shift shaft instruments, and I could go on down the list, they're going to be categorized by the complexity. So there's all those efforts that are going on related to it. Ultimately, there's somebody in the company or some team in the company that has to look at the device as it's being designed and start developing the IFU for the cleaning, disinfection, sterilization of that device. Within our company, we've heavily involved our clinical affairs team, which, are your former did what you did, Hank, right? They walk the walk, they talk the talk. They're extremely important to us in writing the IFU, and they review. We have a whole team from clinical affairs, from marketing, from engineering, from R&D, et cetera, that reviews IFUs as they're being written, edits them, ultimately signs off on them. Same thing with any modification to the IFU. So because we have such a great clinical team, we feel like we've got the resources on staff, if you will, that will be able to look at the IFU from the standpoint of end user, and the implementation of it. So that's how we do it.
I feel like that may be rare in the scope of medical devices that we see coming into our departments to really engage. In one sense, former users, as you said, these folks on your team have done the job, have done the cleaning portion, have seen the challenges of the workflow. I mean, are we talking like 90% of companies are probably not engaging that type of end user kind of feedback, or how big is this?
I would say today, and I know a lot, because I work with a lot of these companies, many of the leading manufacturers of medical devices are doing that today. And and again, they're looking at it from the standpoint, first of all, the design of the device, make it be cleanable. I don't know what the percentage are. I'm sure there are plenty of companies that aren't, right? And they're not the ones that are involved. And those are the ones that are probably not involved in standards activities and other industry. And so I don't have any exposure to them because they're not showing up anywhere. I don't know, exactly what they're doing. And as you know, too, the other thing that is really a big challenge is before 2015, the FDA didn't put a high emphasis on cleaning, quite frankly, when they're reviewing submissions. That changed in 2015 because that document really does call out cleaning, and you'll see it in standards that come from AMI and ISO as well, this greater emphasis on cleaning. But look, there are, as you know, thousands of devices that were developed and introduced before 2015. And unless the manufacturer goes back and decides they're going to update their instructions and make them better and conform to the current practices, best practices, but then, a lot of times the IFUs are just inadequate as far as what instructions they provide.
And there's no calls today, or there's no plans for any kind of retroactive requirement out there.
Well, so once a device is cleared by the FDA, there's no requirement that the device manufacturer go back to the FDA and, let's say, revalidate or validate and do a new submission, 510K or de novo or whatever. And so unless something really bad happens, and we saw this with flexible endoscopes, where, okay, the FDA really, because of the outbreaks, really paid close attention, did require those companies to go back and revalidate their instructions, in some cases make design changes, and as they've done over the time. But unless something like that happens, quite frankly, the FDA doesn't have the bandwidth, to even do it. So even if they wanted to, and from a legal standpoint, they don't really have the legal ability to do that unless something happens. So I personally know, because I was involved with the update to TIR 12, the AAMI TIR 12, which has to do with actually labeling. In other words, what information should the device manufacturer provide to the end user when it comes to cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilizing their device. We had the active involvement, and I just won't mention these companies' names because they haven't, but they're household names. As it turned out, 3 of them that were actively participating in that TIR were working on updating their IFUs, and they started developing product families and the procedures. So what ended up happening, make a long story short, is we ended up being able to add to TIR 12 an annex, 2 annexes that create, I'll call them standardized protocols or processes, and it kind of ties back to the complexity of the device. But we looked at it from the standpoint of what steps would be needed. Simple devices, that don't have moving parts or whatever, an osteotome or something like that, doesn't require the amount of steps. So don't have a bunch of steps in your IFU that, aren't necessary, like sonicate. Well, you probably don't, unless there's something about that design of your particular device, then you probably don't need to run it through a sonic. You may not even really need to spend much time manually cleaning because it might just be able to go into the washer. And then you get to more complex devices that require more steps. So that's what we did in that TIR 12. And the whole idea, that document, we had a lot of user health, sterile processing professionals participate in the development of that. But that document, the target is the manufacturer, right? And what they should do to try to provide instructions that can be implemented. So there's a lot of information in there that a medical device company, if they're not familiar with processes in a healthcare facility as maybe they should be, or, want to learn more, that TIR is there to help them with that.
Is it just a marketing game at this point, an awareness challenge for, documents like TIR 12 with these companies that are not aware? Like, is it just ignorance on their part, or is there knowledge and decision? We're not going to prioritize that.
I think it's primarily ignorance. They don't really understand the challenge. Obviously, because of what I did, I was decades in reprocessing. You're supposed to test worst case when you're doing FDA, right? Clinically worst case, but that's, you have to define it. And I always say, if you want to see worst case, show up in a sterile processing department at about 2 PM, and you'll see what worst case looks like.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to something that you mentioned earlier that I want to go back to. And it was in the development, the writing of these IFUs. And you didn't use this phrase, but basically what you were describing was the difference between technical writing and writing that is drafted in a way that the end user can easily understand, right? Because technical writing itself is its own skill set. People hire technical writers because
we have a technical writer on our staff. He's one of the people that helps write that. It's interesting, right? He's a technical writer, and he's a bright guy, but he didn't have any background in our industry, So, but we have the whole clinical team that does. So he can't write alone.
Right. Well, technical writing is usually in industries that have, very specific compliance regulatory standards that they have to meet as they're writing. But then to your point, we've got a bunch of users over here that our background and our skill set isn't, from the science technical side. Like typically it's more hands-on, manufacturing or customer service. And so finding a way to creatively translate that. And I guess this is here my question for you is, if you've got manufacturers tuning in here to this episode, how would you encourage them or, construct them to say, hey, just a good technical writer's probably not going to get, like, it may get you through FDA and they say everything's good, but if you want people to actually understand and do what you're asking them to do in these IFUs, you're going to need something else.
Yeah. So there's this whole concept of usability, and it relates also very much to reprocessing of a device, including your IFU. Is it usable? And there is a requirement, general requirement, and actually there's becoming more and more requirements around usability that you can talk human factors, right? That you can demonstrate that indeed the instructions that you're providing can be followed by the people that are supposed to follow it. So absolutely involve end users. I realize that a lot of facilities can be a challenge to get that feedback, but putting in your IFU with your devices, you're developing it. If it's not used on a patient, then there's no problem having a neighborhood hospital or somebody go through the process and give you feedback. And it's worthwhile getting feedback from more than one.
Great point. I was going to bring that up.
So and if you're a new company or you don't have like really good links to, let's say, sterile processing, there's chapters, as chapters of sterile processing groups all over the country, and probably one in your backyard or in your state. Attend that conference, get to know some people, make those personal connections, and then they can be your resource to help you as you're writing the IFU that, hey, give us feedback. Does this make sense? I mean, we got steps 1 through 7, they make sense. And when you go to do it, are you ending up with a device that's ready to be used on the next, safe and ready to use on the next patient? So that would be, there's the term, the voice of the customer. That's the voice of the customer, right?
Yeah. The voice of the customer, that's a great category, I guess, to put this in, because there's a whole science around that too. And, one of the things that you mentioned, I think, is really important to call out. Don't just talk to one SPD user, right? And say, hey, now we got the voice of the customer, right? We got this one SPD manager is like, hey, this is golden.
Right.
And many times, and this shows itself not only in the IFU stage, but kind of product design, is we talk to companies that have stumbled upon like a sterile processing group or network, but what they don't realize is they're talking to the early adopters in the industry. So you got this huge bell curve. And they're building everything.
Point. Yeah, that is a great point, Hank. I don't know how you get around it, but you're exactly right. You do get the people that are really passionate, but also they're, as you said, they're the early adopters, and they aren't necessarily representative of once you get past them.
That's the challenge out there, is like in getting that grassroots, into it, which is why, like you said, community hospital is probably a great solution. Like finding someone who didn't find you is a good tip off that, okay, we may be getting closer to the heart of the industry, and these are the average representative users, if you will, of the device or the IFU. So Ralph, our time has gone crazy, as I knew that it would. We're almost out of time here. But I want to ask you one more question, kind of tying in some of the themes that we brought up through the rest of this documentation episode and season, and that's on the topic of competencies in sterile processing. And there's a lot of angles to this, but the main question is, we want our staff to be competent, and we want them to be doing the IFUs, right? Like, it's one thing to get well-written IFUs. It's another thing to get well-read IFUs. It's another thing to get well-written, well-read, and well-done IFUs every single time in our department. So how do we bridge that gap? Like, what insider advice do you give, or what have you seen out there work well in getting from great IFUs to great competency?
Right. Well, for one thing, it's got to be a device that you can actually clean, disinfect, and sterilize with the equipment you have on hand. And that's one of the but again, within IFU can and within AMI, et cetera, that we're really advocating for and pushing for in the industry. But again, I can mostly speak about what we do. But if it's a complex product, a lot of times we'll write a draft competency, right? So that then you could just give that to the manager or the department educator, and that can be a stepping off point. I was reminded by, I know Rose Seavey, and Rose always said, I'm quoting her, she says, if you've been in one sterile processing department, you've been in one sterile processing department. So you're exactly right. Working with a few is better. You'll end up with a better result. But yeah, those competencies, and it may be, a lot of times it's ultimately a give and take. So if the company has a clinical education team, that's the resource. Your educator works with a clinical educator from the manufacturer. Larger companies tend to, but a lot of companies don't have that. So, but you can ask the company for a competency. And if they don't know what you're talking about, then engage with them to help you write it. Because they know the device, they know what the steps are, but then you know what you need and what your staff is like, and so I think that's the teamwork approach would be the way to do that in many instances.
Well, Ralph, I wish I could say all the news was good news on this episode, that IFUs have been solved, nothing else to do, everything's going to be great. But, there was good news here.
Hey, think of it as job security.
There you go. Well, it is really encouraging, Ralph, to hear that there's groups of folks out there that do have this on the radar, on the manufacturer side, on the advocacy side, like your group, and on the user side too. As you said, there's more and more users getting involved in these conversations, and that's the only way forward. So great. Well, really appreciate you coming back here in this studio, and we want to wish you the best as you continue to impact the industry.
All right. Thank you, Hank. Well, thank you. Same to you and the whole Beyond Clean team. You guys doing fantastic work, and just really appreciate your advocacy for our colleagues in the industry. So.
And that was Ralph Basile, Corporate Standards Executive at Healthmark Industries Company, Inc., a Getinge Company. And wow, so much great insight from one of the biggest movers and shakers out there in the IFU space. So Ralph wouldn't be offended for me calling him that, but he's a doer. He's not just sitting out there saying, hey, these IFUs can be approved. He's getting out there in the trenches, in the battle, trying to help it for all of us, to work with manufacturers to bring this awareness, as we discussed in this episode, that the cleaning part of our IFUs is just as important, if not more so, than the sterilization. Maybe not more so, but I guess just as important. Because if we can't get it clean, as you all know, we cannot get it sterile. So great insight on just how they're put together. The challenges of writing, the drive for greater standardization, validating these IFUs, both from, hey, does this actually work? Do your instructions work? But can we do them and understand them on the user side of sterile processing? So I can't think of a better way to wrap up season 24 on documentation than this interview here with Ralph Basile. I hope you enjoyed this season. And if you want to check out more of the IFU CAN group, like Ralph said, they're on LinkedIn. So go to LinkedIn and just search for IFU CAN. You can see their group and you can follow along with their articles and the conversations and opportunities they may have for you to get involved from the user or the manufacturer side of things. And as we wrap here for season 24, I want to remind you that we're going to have a rerun, a spate of episodes here before we get to season 25 of Beyond Clean. So we're going to pick some of our favorite episodes from seasons past and run them here for the next few weeks as we prepare for the launch of season 25. And season 25 is going to be a fun one. The little things that make a big difference in sterile processing. I'm going to leave you hanging on what that means, but the little things that make a big difference in sterile processing. We're going to have 8 episodes talking about that. So hang with us, keep fighting dirty, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.